The morning sun peeked through the clouds as the Robertson family made their way to Sweet Valley Stables. The air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of hay and leather that had become such a comfort to them over the years. But today was different. Today, their hearts were heavy with worry as they walked towards the barn where their beloved horse, Storm, lay waiting. Storm wasn't just any horse. For 5 years, he had been the stable's pride and joy, known throughout the county for his gentle nature and striking dark coat that shimmered like polished onyx in the sunlight. Children would point and gasp in wonder whenever he galloped across the pasture, his powerful muscles rippling with each stride. He was the kind of horse that made people fall in love with horses. But now, Storm lay motionless in his stall, his once bright eyes dulled with pain. It had started 3 days ago when the stable hands found him collapsed during their morning rounds. At first, they thought he had simply slipped in the wet grass. However, as the hours ticked by and Storm showed no signs of getting up, the truth began to sink in. Something was terribly wrong. The local vet arrived first, her face growing more concerned with each test she performed. Soon, more veterinarians followed, their medical bags filled with equipment and their conversations hushed and serious. They performed test after test, each result more discouraging than the last. X-rays revealed what appeared to be severe damage to Storm's spine, an injury that left him paralyzed from his shoulders down. "I've never seen anything quite like this," the lead veterinarian explained to the family, his voice gentle but firm. He'd been treating horses for over 30 years, and his weathered face showed the weight of the diagnosis he was about to deliver. The damage to his spine, it's extensive. Even if we could afford the most expensive treatments, the chances of recovery are virtually non-existent. Mrs. Robertson clutched her husband's arm, tears streaming down her face. Their daughter stood nearby, her small hands pressed against Storm's stall door, watching as the magnificent horse lay there, his breathing shallow but steady. The stable, usually filled with the sounds of nickering horses and bustling activity, had grown unusually quiet, as if the other animals could sense the gravity of the moment. The veterinarians gathered the family in the stable office, its walls covered with ribbons and photos of happier times. They explained the situation in detail. The paralysis was complete, and Storm was likely in considerable pain. The medical team had exhausted every conventional treatment option they could think of. Their conclusion was unanimous. The most humane course of action would be to put Storm down. The news spread quickly through the small farming community. Storm had been more than just the Robertsons' horse. He'd been a local celebrity of sorts. He'd given countless riding lessons to beginners, participated in every county fair, and even helped with therapy sessions for children with special needs. Each person who heard the news felt a personal sense of loss. The family was given a week to say their goodbyes. They spent every moment they could with Storm, bringing him fresh hay and his favorite apples, talking to him softly, and remembering all the joy he had brought to their lives. Other families from the community started visiting too, bringing carrots and sugar cubes, sharing stories of their experiences with the magnificent horse who had touched so many lives. As the dreaded day approached, the atmosphere at Sweet Valley Stables grew heavier. The usual cheerful chatter was replaced with whispered conversations and quiet sniffles. Even the weather seemed to reflect the mood, with gray clouds gathering overhead and a cool wind rustling through the trees. Nobody wanted to accept that this was the end for Storm, but what else could they do? What nobody knew was that fate had something else in store. Sometimes hope comes from the most unexpected places, and in Storm's case, it would arrive in the form of someone who refused to accept that nothing could be done. Someone who would see something that all the experts had missed, proving that sometimes the purest wisdom comes from the most innocent of hearts. Life has a funny way of bringing the right people together at just the right moment. For Storm, that person turned out to be a small, determined 6-year-old girl who lived on the neighboring farm. Little Rose, with her bright eyes and untied shoelaces, had grown up watching the horses at Sweet Valley Stables from her family's kitchen window. Unlike most children her age who were drawn to the younger, more energetic horses, Rose had always been fascinated by Storm. She would spend hours sitting on the fence, watching him move with such grace across the pasture. Her parents often joked that she learned to say horse before she could say mama or papa. When Rose heard about Storm's condition from her parents during dinner, she didn't finish her favorite mac and cheese. something that had never happened before. That night, she lay in bed clutching her stuffed horse toy, her mind racing with thoughts about her four-legged friend lying alone in his stable. The next morning, Rose surprised everyone by waking up extra early. Still in her rainbow pajamas, she marched into the kitchen and announced to her surprised parents that she needed to visit Storm. Her father tried to explain that it might be too sad for her to see Storm in his current state, but Rose stood firm, her small hands planted on her hips. "Storm is my friend," she declared with the unwavering certainty that only a child can possess. "And you always say we shouldn't leave our friends alone when they're sick." Her parents couldn't argue with that logic. After breakfast, Rose's mother walked her over to the stable. The usually bustling barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls and the occasional coo of mourning doves in the rafters. When Rose saw Storm lying in his stall, she didn't cry or run away like the adults expected. Instead, she pulled up her little wooden stool, the one she used to reach the bathroom sink, and sat down next to his stall. She started talking to Storm as if nothing had changed, telling him about her day at school, about the butterfly she saw in the garden, and about how her little brother had gotten spaghetti sauce all over his face at dinner. The stable hands were amazed to see Storm's ears twitch forward whenever Rose spoke, something they hadn't noticed him do since the accident. While the adults discussed medical terms and treatment options in hushed voices, Rose simply sat there, reading Storm her favorite picture books and sharing her snacks, though her mother made sure Storm only got the apple slices and not her chocolate cookies. Days passed, and Rose's visits became a regular part of life at Sweet Valley Stables. She would arrive every afternoon after school, carrying her backpack filled with books, toys, and treats for Storm. The stable hands began to notice something peculiar. Storm seemed different when Rose was around. His eyes would follow her movements, and sometimes they could swear they saw his tail twitch ever so slightly. What touched everyone's hearts the most was how Rose refused to treat Storm any differently. While others spoke in sad, hushed tones around him, she chatted away cheerfully, telling him jokes and singing songs she learned in school. She would describe the clouds she saw on her way to the stable, explaining in detail why one looked exactly like an ice cream cone and another like a dancing elephant. Rose even brought her favorite toys to share with Storm. Among them was a small musical toy she had gotten for her birthday, a simple instrument that made gentle, tinkling sounds. She would play it for Storm, making up little songs and telling him that music always made her feel better when she was sick. Nobody had the heart to tell her that Storm's condition was permanent. How could they explain such a harsh reality to someone who believed so completely in hope? But what they didn't realize was that Rose's unwavering faith would lead to something extraordinary. Sometimes the purest hearts can see things that educated minds miss, and Rose was about to prove that miracles often start with the smallest observations. As the sun set on another day at Sweet Valley Stables, Rose packed up her belongings, promising Storm she would return tomorrow with a new story to share. What she didn't know was that her simple act of friendship was about to unlock a mystery that would change everything, not just for Storm, but for the entire veterinary community. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when everything changed at Sweet Valley Stables. The kind of day where the rain drummed steadily on the barn roof, creating a peaceful rhythm that made the whole world feel a little slower, a little quieter. Rose had arrived for her daily visit to Storm, her yellow raincoat dripping onto the stable floor as she shook off like a puppy. As always, she carried her backpack full of treasures to share with Storm. Today, she was especially excited because she brought something new, a small musical toy her grandmother had given her over the weekend. It was a simple instrument with colorful keys that made sweet, bell-like sounds when played. "Look what I brought you today, Storm," Rose announced cheerfully, settling onto her wooden stool. The stable was quiet except for the rain and the occasional shuffle of horses in their stalls. She began pressing the keys randomly, creating a playful melody that echoed through the barn. That's when it happened, something so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. As Rose played a particular sequence of notes, Storm's back leg twitched. Not just the tiny movements they'd seen before, but a real, noticeable twitch. Rose stopped playing immediately, her eyes wide with surprise. "Did you just move?" she whispered to Storm, her voice filled with wonder. She played the same notes again, watching carefully. There it was again, another twitch, this time accompanied by a slight movement in his tail. Rose jumped up so quickly she knocked over her stool. "You can move," she shouted, her voice echoing through the stable. "You can move, Storm." She ran to find Mr. Thompson, the stable manager, who was fixing a fence nearby. Pulling on his sleeve with urgent excitement, she tried to explain what she'd seen. At first, Mr. Thompson smiled kindly, patting her head as adults often do when they think children are letting their imagination run wild. But Rose wouldn't give up. She grabbed his hand and practically dragged him back to Storm's stall. "Just watch," she insisted, picking up her musical toy again. Rose played the same sequence of notes, her small fingers dancing across the keys. Mr. Thompson started to say something gentle about how sometimes we see what we want to see. But then he stopped mid-sentence. There it was again. Storm's leg moved, and this time there was no mistaking it. Mr. Thompson dropped his tool belt with a clatter. He'd been working with horses for 30 years, and he'd never seen anything like this. He asked Rose to keep playing while he observed Storm more closely. For the next hour, they experimented with different notes and rhythms, carefully documenting when and how Storm responded. Word spread quickly through the stable. Soon, Rose's parents were called, and they arrived to find a small crowd gathered around Storm's stall. Everyone watched in amazement as Rose demonstrated her discovery again and again. Some people cried, others hugged, and a few just stood there shaking their heads in disbelief. Rose's mother, who worked as a nurse at the local hospital, had an idea. She took out her phone and started recording videos of Storm's reactions to different musical sequences. "We need to show this to the veterinarians," she said, her voice trembling with hope. This could be important. As the afternoon wore on, more people arrived at the stable. The local news about Rose's discovery had spread through their small farming community like wildfire. Neighbors who had known Storm for years came to see for themselves, each one leaving with tears in their eyes and hope in their hearts. What made the discovery even more remarkable was how specific it seemed to be. Storm didn't respond to just any music. It was particular combinations of notes that triggered the movement. Rose, with her child's intuition, started keeping track in her own way, using different colored stickers on her toy to mark the special notes that made Storm move. By evening, the rain had stopped, and golden sunlight streamed through the stable windows. Rose sat beside Storm's stall, exhausted but happy, still occasionally playing gentle tunes on her musical toy. She didn't understand why everyone was making such a big fuss. To her, it was simple. Storm had been listening to her music all along. He just needed time to show them. As darkness fell and it was time to go home, Rose leaned close to Storm's ear and whispered, "See, I told you music makes everything better." She didn't know it yet, but her simple observation was about to spark a chain of events that would change veterinary medicine forever. Sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from complex medical equipment or years of research, but from the pure, unfiltered perception of a child who simply refused to give up hope. The videos of Storm's response to Rose's music spread through the veterinary community like wildfire. At first, many experts dismissed it as wishful thinking or coincidence. After all, how could a child's musical toy do what advanced medical treatments couldn't? But the more they watched the carefully documented footage, the more intrigued they became. One person who couldn't stop watching the videos was Dr. Lee, a leading expert in horse rehabilitation who had dedicated her life to understanding how horses heal. She'd been working at a prestigious animal hospital in California when the footage reached her inbox. That night, she stayed in her office until dawn, replaying the videos dozens of times, taking detailed notes about every twitch and movement. "There's something here," she told her colleagues the next morning, dark circles under her eyes but excitement in her voice. "The movements are too consistent to be random." Within hours, she was on a plane headed to Sweet Valley Stables, carrying more equipment than most people take on a month-long vacation. When Dr. Lee arrived at the stable, she found Rose sitting in her usual spot next to Storm, playing her musical toy while doing her homework. The doctor was struck by how normal it seemed to the little girl, as if playing music for a paralyzed horse was the most natural thing in the world. "Can you show me exactly what you do?" Dr. Lee asked, setting up her sophisticated monitoring equipment around Storm's stall. Rose nodded eagerly, happy to have a new audience for her music. As she played, Dr. Lee's machines recorded every tiny response in Storm's muscles and nervous system. What the machines revealed was extraordinary. Each time Rose played certain combinations of notes, Storm's nervous system showed clear signs of activity. It wasn't just random twitching, there was a pattern. Dr. Lee's hands trembled as she reviewed the data. In her 20 years of veterinary medicine, she'd never seen anything like it. "It's like the music is waking up his nervous system," she explained to Rose's parents and the stable owners, spreading her charts across a wooden table in the stable office. "The specific frequencies are triggering responses that our traditional treatments couldn't achieve." The adults exchanged confused glances, but Rose just nodded as if this made perfect sense. More specialists began arriving at Sweet Valley Stables, turning the quiet barn into something resembling a research center. They brought machines with complicated names and even more complicated purposes. But interestingly, none of their high-tech equipment worked as well as Rose's simple musical toy when it came to getting a response from Storm. The biggest challenge was understanding exactly why certain notes worked while others didn't. The specialists spent hours recording and analyzing the sounds, trying to identify the precise frequencies that triggered Storm's responses. They created charts and graphs, wrote reports, and had long discussions using words that Rose couldn't pronounce. Through it all, Rose kept up her daily visits, unbothered by the crowd of experts with their clipboards and computers. She would sit with Storm, play her music, and tell him about her day at school. The specialists soon noticed something remarkable. Storm's responses were stronger when Rose was the one playing the music. "There's something about the combination of the sounds and her presence," Dr. Lee observed, watching Rose play her simple melodies. "It's like he's learned to trust the music because he trusts her." This observation led to an entirely new understanding of how music therapy might work with injured animals. The local newspaper ran a story about the discovery, featuring a photo of Rose sitting beside Storm's stall with her musical toy. The headline read, "Child's music brings hope to paralyzed horse." Soon, other news outlets picked up the story, and Sweet Valley Stables began receiving calls from veterinarians and horse owners around the world. As the sun set on another busy day of research and testing, Rose packed up her backpack as usual. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked Storm, getting a gentle nicker in response. Dr. Lee watched the interaction with tears in her eyes, reminded that sometimes the greatest scientific breakthroughs come from the simplest places, like the unwavering faith of a child who just wanted to help her friend feel better. Nobody knew yet exactly how this discovery would change veterinary medicine, but one thing was certain. What had started as a child's simple act of kindness was blossoming into something that could help animals around the world. And it all began because a little girl refused to believe that music couldn't heal a broken spirit. The next few weeks at Sweet Valley Stables felt like being part of a wonderful experiment where hope and science danced together. Dr. Lee and her team had set up what they called a healing space in the barn, transforming Storm's stall into something that looked part stable, part music studio, and part medical facility. The treatment plan they developed was unlike anything anyone had seen before. "We're going to combine what Rose discovered with traditional physical therapy," Dr. Lee explained to everyone gathered in the barn. She held up Rose's musical toy, now connected to sophisticated equipment that could repeat the exact frequencies that had first triggered Storm's movement. The stable owners were worried about the cost. Cutting-edge medical treatments don't come cheap. But then something beautiful happened. When word spread about Storm's unique case, the local community stepped up in ways that brought tears to everyone's eyes. The feed store started donating extra hay. Local musicians offered their time to help with the sound therapy sessions. Children even set up lemonade stands to raise money for Storm's treatment. Each morning began with gentle sound therapy using the special frequencies they discovered. They played Rose's magic melody, as everyone had started calling it, through special speakers while Dr. Lee's team carefully monitored Storm's responses. They noticed that certain times of day seemed to work better than others. Storm was most responsive during the quiet early morning hours and just before sunset. The physical therapy part was trickier. They needed to help Storm's muscles remember how to work while being careful not to cause him any pain. The team designed a special sling system that could support Storm's weight, allowing him to be lifted slightly off the ground. This way, they could move his legs in a walking motion while the healing music played. Rose still came every day after school, now wearing a special badge that Dr. Lee had made for her that said Chief Music Therapist. She took her role very seriously, carefully following all the doctor's instructions while adding her own special touch to the treatment. She would tell Storm stories about other horses who had overcome big challenges, making up some parts when she thought the stories needed extra excitement. Some days were harder than others. There were times when Storm seemed tired or frustrated and progress felt slow. But Rose never lost her enthusiasm. "Remember when you first moved your leg for me?" She would whisper to Storm during tough moments. "That was just the beginning. You can do so much more now." The most exciting moment came during the 3rd week of treatment. While the music played and Storm was supported in his sling, he managed to take his first intentional step. It was small, wobbly, and required lots of support, but it was definitely a step. The whole barn erupted in cheers, with Rose jumping up and down so excitedly that her glasses almost fell off. Dr. Lee's team documented everything meticulously. They recorded every tiny improvement, every new movement, every response to different sound frequencies. They were creating an entirely new treatment protocol, one that could potentially help other injured horses in the future. Rose insisted on keeping her own records too, drawing pictures of Storm's progress in her school notebook. The local TV station came to do a story about the revolutionary treatment. They interviewed Dr. Lee about the science behind it all, but what really touched viewers' hearts was watching Rose demonstrate how she first discovered Storm's response to music. The reporter asked her if she had known her music would help Storm heal. "I just knew he was listening," she said simply, "and when people listen, they can hear how to get better." As word spread about Storm's treatment, other veterinarians began visiting Sweet Valley stables to learn about this groundbreaking approach. They took notes, made videos, and asked endless questions. But what impressed them most wasn't just the medical breakthrough, it was how the treatment combined scientific innovation with simple, pure compassion. One evening, as the sun was setting and the day's treatment session was ending, Dr. Lee found Rose sitting with Storm as usual. "You know," the doctor said, sitting down beside her, "sometimes the best medicine isn't something we can put in a bottle or write on a prescription. Sometimes it's just having someone who believes in you enough to keep trying new things." Rose nodded, continuing to play her gentle melody as Storm dozed peacefully nearby, his body showing more strength with each passing day. The journey to recovery is rarely a straight path, and Storm's journey proved this true. Over the next 3 months, Sweet Valley Stables became a place where small victories were celebrated like major championships, and even the tiniest signs of progress brought joy to everyone involved. Early morning therapy sessions became a daily ritual. The stable hands would arrive before sunrise to find Dr. Lee already there, checking equipment and preparing for the day ahead. The soft glow of dawn would filter through the barn windows as they began each session with Rose's special melody, now refined and perfected through careful study. "Recovery is like learning to dance again," Dr. Lee would explain to visitors who came to observe the treatment. "First, you have to remember the music, then your body remembers the steps." Storm seemed to understand this perfectly. Each day, his movements became a little more coordinated, a little more purposeful. The sling system they used looked like a giant horse-sized hammock decorated with colorful ribbons that Rose had added to make it more cheerful. At first, Storm could only stand in it for a few minutes at a time. But as the weeks passed, those minutes stretched into hours, and the sling became less of a support and more of a safety net. One particularly memorable morning, something amazing happened. While Rose was playing her usual morning melody, Storm did something nobody expected. He tried to nod his head in time with the music. The movement was small, but it showed that he wasn't just responding to the sounds. He was engaging with them. Rose was so excited she played the same tune 3 times in a row, and each time Storm moved along with it. The physical therapy sessions grew longer and more complex. The team introduced new exercises, always paired with specific musical sequences. They discovered that different melodies seemed to help with different types of movement. Slower songs worked better for balance exercises, while more upbeat tunes helped with leg movements. Throughout it all, Rose remained Storm's most dedicated supporter. She would sit for hours, doing her homework in the stable while the therapy sessions continued. Sometimes she would read her school books out loud to Storm, convinced that he enjoyed learning about multiplication tables and spelling words just as much as she did. The local community continued their amazing support. A group of retired musicians formed a volunteer schedule, taking turns playing live music during therapy sessions. The town's music shop donated new equipment, and a local tech company helped set up a system to record and analyze Storm's responses to different sound frequencies. There were challenging days too. Days when Storm seemed tired or progress felt slow. But these moments brought out the best in everyone. The stable hands would tell funny stories to lift spirits, Dr. Lee would adjust the treatment plan, and Rose would simply sit with Storm, humming softly and telling him about all the adventures they would have once he was better. Weather became an unexpected ally in Storm's recovery. They noticed he responded better on sunny days, so they began scheduling more intensive therapy sessions when the weather was good. They even built a special covered walkway so Storm could feel the sun and fresh air while staying supported by his therapy equipment. By the end of the 3rd month, Storm could stand on his own for short periods. It was wobbly at first, like a foal finding its legs, but it was standing nonetheless. The first time he managed to stay up for a full minute, there wasn't a dry eye in the barn. Rose insisted on throwing a tiny celebration, complete with carrot cake for the humans and extra apple treats for Storm. Progress photos covered one wall of the stable office, showing Storm's journey week by week. Visitors would often stop to look at them, amazed by the transformation. But what the photos couldn't capture was the spirit of determination that filled the stable, the unwavering belief that something everyone had thought impossible was becoming possible, one musical note at a time. As the sun set on another day of therapy, Rose sat in her usual spot, playing a gentle lullaby on her musical toy. Storm stood nearby, swaying slightly to the music, his eyes bright and alert. Dr. Lee watched them from the stable door, her medical charts forgotten for a moment, as she witnessed something that went beyond science. The simple power of hope, set to music by a child who never stopped believing. 6 months after a little girl first played music for a paralyzed horse, Sweet Valley Stables was about to witness something remarkable. The morning dawned clear and bright, with golden sunlight streaming through the barn windows. There was an atmosphere of excitement in the air, as if nature itself knew something special was about to happen. The stable yard was filled with people who had been part of Storm's journey. The local newspaper reporter stood ready with his camera. Dr. Lee and her team had their medical equipment set up to document everything. Rose sat on her usual stool, her musical toy in her lap, wearing her lucky rainbow sweater for the occasion. Today was the day they would remove Storm's support sling completely. After months of gradual progress, Dr. Lee believed he was ready to stand and walk entirely on his own. Everyone held their breath as the stable hands carefully began removing the equipment that had supported Storm for so long. "Remember, buddy," Rose whispered to Storm, "you've done this before. Today, we just do it without the safety net." She began playing the special melody that had become known around the stable as Storm's Song, the same sequence of notes that had first made his leg twitch all those months ago. As the last of the support equipment was removed, Storm stood still for a moment, as if gathering his courage. His legs trembled slightly, but held firm. Dr. Lee watched the monitors closely, amazed by the strength of his muscle responses. Then, with the music playing softly in the background, Storm took his first completely independent step. The crowd stayed absolutely silent, afraid that even a whisper might break the spell. Another step followed, then another. Storm's movements were careful and deliberate, but steady. Rose continued playing, her small fingers dancing across the keys as tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. Suddenly, Storm did something that made everyone gasp. He gently lowered his head and nuzzled Rose's hair, nearly knocking her glasses off. It was his way of saying thank you to the little girl who had never given up on him. The newspaper photographer caught the moment perfectly, capturing what would become an award-winning photo titled "The Power of Hope." News of Storm's recovery spread far beyond their small town. Veterinary journals published papers about the groundbreaking treatment that combined music therapy with traditional rehabilitation. Dr. Lee was invited to speak at conferences around the country, always starting her presentations with the video of Rose making her initial discovery. But the most beautiful part of the story was yet to come. A month after Storm's full recovery, a family arrived at Sweet Valley Stables with their daughter, who used a wheelchair. They had read about Storm's story and wondered if spending time with him might help their child. Rose was there that day, and she watched as Storm gently approached the little girl, moving slowly and carefully as if he understood exactly what she needed. That visit marked the beginning of something new. Sweet Valley Stables started a special program where Storm worked with children facing physical challenges. He seemed to have a special gift for it, as if his own journey had given him an understanding of what it meant to struggle with movement. Rose would often help during these sessions, playing her music while Storm worked his magic with the children. The stable became a place of healing for many. Children who were told they might never walk would take their first steps alongside Storm. Those who struggled with speech would find their voice while telling him stories. Parents would often say there was something magical about the combination of the gentle horse, the music, and the encouraging presence of the little girl who had started it all. 1 year after Rose first discovered Storm's response to music, Sweet Valley Stables held a celebration. People came from all around to share in the joy. Storm gave demonstrations of his recovery, proudly walking, trotting, and even doing gentle jumps. Rose played her music, now accompanied by some of the professional musicians who had volunteered during Storm's treatment. During the celebration, Dr. Lee shared some exciting news. The treatment protocol they had developed for Storm was being adapted to help other injured animals around the world. "But we never forget," she told the crowd, "that this all started because a little girl believed in the healing power of music and the strength of her friend's spirit." As the sun set on the celebration, Rose sat in her favorite spot in the stable, playing a quiet tune while Storm dozed nearby. The stable cat curled up at her feet, and the evening breeze carried the sweet smell of hay through the barn. A new chapter was beginning at Sweet Valley Stables, one filled with hope, healing, and the magic that happens when you believe in miracles. "You know what?" Rose said to Storm, putting away her musical toy for the night. "Sometimes the best kind of magic is the kind that helps other people find their own strength." Storm nickered softly in agreement, and in that moment it seemed like all was right with the world.